presentation. We have the pleasure of welcoming Tristan from our very own Birmingham Power BI meetup for his third presentations. Very curious about this MCP servers. So I want to see if AI could finally automate our work. And Tristan will be answering that question. Go for it.
Thank you, Paddy. Good evening, everyone. I'm Tristan Mobbs, data translator. I'm going to talk to you about the Power BI MCP server and AI development in Power BI. Now, this talk originated at this meetup back in December. I was having a chat with Sarah. She suggested I do this talk. It's evolved a little bit from there. So it started out as the Power BI MCP server. The MCP server had just been released in November. And I was very excited about what it could do with AI. And as I've gone through the 3 or 4 months learning about this talk, it's evolved a little. So actually this talk evolves into AI development in Power BI, but actually featuring the MCP server. Before we get started, we're going to have a quick dictionary definition. So I'm going to put up 3 acronyms. When they pop up, please shout out what they mean. First up, AI, nice and easy. Excellent. Next, LLM. Excellent. And then MCP. Excellent. So what is Model Context Protocol? So it's a component that sits between an LLM and a system. So in this case, it'll sit between my Copilot and Power BI, but it could sit between Board and a CRM system or an ERP system. And effectively, it tells a large language model what tools are available within that system. And it helps make large language models move from being a probabilistic tool to a little bit more deterministic when working with the system. And I'm then going to put up a bold statement. The development is changing. And we've seen over the last 18 months, even the last 6 months, how rapidly this is coming. And what this means is that we're going to have to look at different skills and see where AI can really help us in developing in Power BI. And we're going to see a bit of a shift. And AI can do an awful lot now for us. And we're going to see how we can use that. And what that means is that slightly different skills are going to be needed. We're going to need to learn how to work with AI and how to use it effectively and channel the things it's good at and work out which skills we've currently got that it can't replace and where we can add value. Before we dive into that, though, we're going to look at how we got here. So when I first started using computers, I was given an Amstrad computer, which makes me sound far older than I actually am. But we started out with command line. So you didn't have a mouse with this computer, you just had text. So you wrote text in and you got text back out. We then evolved a bit and we got tools such as Excel. So we had a bit more of a visual representation. So we could have our data and we had a lot of VBA code alongside it. And lots of companies have gone through this approach of having Excel and VBA running your company. And lots are still in that stage. And then we've moved to a more modern time. So we're here with Power BI. This is the interface we're used to. We've got a nice graphical interface. We can drag and drop. We've got this really nice experience for developing reports. And then the future might look like this. So we're going back to that text interface. And we've got a chat window down the bottom, and we're writing in text. And we're getting text back. So we've gone full circle in a way. We started out with command line, we've moved through graphical interfaces, and we've gone back to some text output, but with the ability to have graphics as well. And this changes a bit how we develop. So we've always moved on because there's a better way or a faster way or a way for a wider group of people to have access to these tools. And AI is allowing that. AI allows more people access to this to develop it, allows more people the skills to develop Power BI tools, and it allows us with experience in Power BI to develop things far more quickly. So before we move on, I'm going to ask, how does anyone start with Power BI at the moment when you're given a request for a report? So hands up if you start by drawing it out on paper. Does anyone start there? Yeah. So anyone go to what we saw earlier, maybe Figma, so the more digital version, start doing some wireframes there. Few nods, yeah, Fabio does it, excellent. How about you just open Power BI desktop, drag in some data and just crack on? Yeah, quite a few people. Anyone open Visual Studio Code to start out? Got one or two people on the front. Now, I can guarantee you in 6 months to a year's time, if I ask that same question, there'd be a lot more answer. And so the future looks different. And that's both really scary and really exciting. And we don't know quite how this is going to turn out. But the good news is the barriers to entry for getting started are really low. And over the next half an hour or so, we're going to see how. What do you need to get started? Very simple. You need a GitHub account so you can access a Copilot. You need Visual Studio Code so you can interact with both Power BI and the LLM. And we can get set up in a few minutes. So let's do it. We're going to look at how you install Visual Studio Code. We're going to connect it to Copilot, and we're going to install the Power BI modeling MCP server. So if I jump over to the Microsoft Store, which I did have open, but doesn't appear to be open anymore. Go to the Microsoft Store, search for Visual Studio Code, and we'll have a couple of options pop up. And we want this version, so the blue version. And there is a green version which has preview features in it. Go for the blue version, click install, and you'll be set up. Once you have done that, you will open Visual Studio Code. And you'll be greeted with a screen that looks like this. So we've got some different screens down the left-hand side that we can go through. We've got our chat window over on the right-hand side. And when we start, we get this nice welcome feature. And here it says use AI features with Copilot for free. So that's exactly what we want to do. So I'm going to click use AI features, and it's going to ask me to continue with one of these. So I'm going to choose continue with GitHub. And I've already got a GitHub account signed in, so I can just authorize it here. If you haven't, this will take you to a sign up screen, and it will take you a few minutes to sign up. So I'm going to click continue, and then up the top here, it's going to try and take me back to Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to click open, and it should jump us back to Visual Studio Code. There we go. And what that'll then do is over on the left-hand side, if we go to extensions, it will install GitHub Copilot Chat. So we've already done 3 parts of what we're trying to do. We've got Visual Studio Code, we've connected it to GitHub, and we've installed the chat extension. The final thing is we need the Power BI modeling MCP server. So we can search for that in here as well and click install. And it will then pop up this window and install it. And it will take a minute or two to install. And while it's doing that, it should, there we go, come up with some details around the MCP server. So have a good read through that, but it gives you some initial ideas of what you can do. So we can interact with natural language to build and modify our semantic models. We can do things at scale, and we can do documentation and other things with this. And one of the things that really annoyed me when Microsoft first released this was they did a video on the MCP server. Everyone's being all excited about it. What can this do? And they showed you how to rename one column. And how long does it take to rename a column? 10, 15 seconds? Not long. It takes you far longer with the MCP server. So that's not the place to start. But let's see where we can get started. So with the MCP server, we have now done these 4 steps. We're ready to connect. And there are 3 options. You can connect directly to Power BI Desktop. You can connect to PBIP files, so you don't need Power BI Desktop open. You can connect to the file itself. And you can connect to Power BI Service. Power BI Service only really came out in the last release, even though they pitched it all along. But if you do want to connect to it, you need to go into your tenant settings and enable that setting over on that side. You see that was in preview when that was taken, and I think it's still. But before we do jump into connecting, I do have to mention security. So there's one tool within the Power BI MCP server that is called DAX Query Operations. If you have sensitive data in your semantic model, please turn that tool off, and then you can't access your data through the tool. Equally, if you're using the pbit files, there are two files you need to add to a git ignore file if you're using GitHub and code report. And we'll see that again shortly. So let's connect to a semantic model and get started. So I'm just going to close these down, and I'm going to bring this chat window into the main area so it's a little bit bigger. And what we'll see down the bottom is our chat window. And there are a couple of important settings down. The first one we've got that we'll look at a bit more later is our different modes. So we've got 3 modes by default. We've got agent mode, which will allow you to edit your semantic models. We've got ask mode, which is probably where you got started with LLMs, where you just ask it a question and get something back. And you've got plan mode, where you can actually go through, design a few things, iterate a bit before handing it over to an agent. So I'm going to leave it on agent for now. You'll next get the option of choosing a model. If you're on the free Copilot, you'll have a very limited selection. I'm paying for it, so I've got a few more selections. I'm going to choose the GPT 5.3 codex because I've had good experiences with it. If you use some of the cheaper models, sometimes it has a bit more problems connecting with the MCP server, and you have to give it a bit more specific information to get it to work. And then we've got a really important setting, configure tools. If I click on that, up the top here, you will then see all the tools that are available to my agent in my chat. You'll see there are all these built-in tools that it gets as part of Visual Studio Code, including Browser, which if you want to get a bit more sophisticated, you can get it to open your Power BI models in the service when you've done some changes and do some testing with it. And you'll see the Power BI modeling MCP here, and it's not selected. So I need to click Update Tools here, and it will then show you all the tools that are available, and it's now given access to my agent to all of these tools. And here is the DAX query operations that you may want to turn off for security reasons. I've just got some data about cricket, so I'm not fussed about accessing that. And so that's it set up. We now have the tools, and we now have a chat window available. So I'm going to jump over to my prompts file and grab my first prompt. So as simple as this, connect to AI development base file with measures in Power BI desktop. A really catchy name. I'm going to put that in here. And what you'll see is it will then start working. And it'll start to tell you about which tools it's using. So here you can see it's trying to run connection operations. And the first thing it's going to do, it's ask me if I want to allow this. So when you're first using this, you'll get this pop up a lot, and I suggest you read what it's doing before clicking the blue button. I've used this quite a bit, and I'm happy with what it's going to do. So I'm going to allow tools from Power BI modeling MCP in this session. So I'm going to give it a bit more access, so I don't have to click the blue button as many times. And it's going to go through and work out how to connect. Now, typically in my experience, it tends to fail on the first time, but then does it again the second time. And here you go, it's failed for some reason, but it's just going to try again, and it should connect this second time. So it's going to go and run the operation again and try and connect. There you go, and say it's now connected to that Power BI instance. And it's now running database operations to tell me a little bit about that file. So we're now connected, which is really exciting. We're now at the point where we can do some things in Power BI. So I've got the Power BI file down here. What I've got in here is 2 tables with cricket information in from the last Ashes series. So we've got some matches and we've got some detailed information about those matches. And these are joined with a simple relationship, so it's very basic place to get started. And in one of these tables, I've got a whole load of measures that are a bit all over the place because I didn't tidy up when I should have. So what I'm going to do is jump over to my next prompt. I'm going to get it to put all of those measures in the measures folder. So got a simple prompt of add all those measures, do a measures table, put them in relevant folders, and add any measures with errors to errors. Now I've got 49 measures in there, so that would take me quite a long time to do if I did it manually myself. And this is going to go and try and do it for me, and we'll do it far quicker. And the interesting thing when testing this is that because it's a probabilistic tool, what it will do each time will be subtly different. So if the first time it does it and it does it terribly, you can just chuck it out and try again with the exact same prompt, and it might do it a bit better. And that's worth knowing for when we get a bit more advanced. So this is the starting point. We've connected to an MCP server. We can now connect to our semantic model and do development using AI tools to speed us up. And this is really the starting point. This is kind of the entry level, not the entry level Microsoft showed with renaming one column, but a good entry level where we're going to start being able to speed up the things that take us too much time. But we're just automating things that took us a bit of time. What we're going to look at over the next half an hour is how you can move from this to a more developed agentic approach to your development. So we're not just going to tinker around the edges. We're going to look at how you can fundamentally change your development approach and where you start. And as this has gone on, it's now going to actually try and make some modifications to my semantic model. So it's just asking me to confirm that again. So we'll say yes, and it will go and do that. So you can see it's identified 49 measures, found the ones that are errors, and it's now going to go and do those updates. So it's going to take a little bit more time to do those. And here you can see it's now using different tools with the MCP server. So we're running table operations, run some measure operations, and it's now moved all the measures, and it's now putting them in their folders for me. So something that would take me quite a lot of time to go through and click on each measure to do, it is now doing for me. And we'll give it another tiny bit of time, and it should come through. There we go. So we can see what it's done. It's created a new measures table for me. It's moved all 49 of my measures into that folder, and it's put them into folders within that. So if I now jump back over to my Power BI file, I can see that I've now got a measures table with various folders within it, and all of my measures with errors are here for me to go and sort out. So that would have taken me a long time, and it's done it really well. So that's our first step, and that's our starting point. So we've done this bit of development, and it's taken us 10 minutes or so to go from not being connected to anything to getting completely set up and doing our first bit of agentic development. But we're going to level up 3 times now. So first, we're going to look at using pbit files. So these are currently in preview, it's worth noting, but what pbit files allow us to do is not just develop our semantic model, which our MCP server allows us to do. They also allow us to develop the report. And because they hold everything as code, so your semantic model is held as code, and your report is held as code, they allow us to do version control. And so you've probably done version control in Power BI before by either incrementing the version number, or you may have got more advanced and gone into SharePoint version control. But this allows us to go fully version controlled in GitHub. And what did we do at the very start? We signed up for a GitHub account. So you're in a great place to be able to do this. So let's jump in and see how you do that. So I'm going to jump back over to my browser and my GitHub account. I'm going to browse to the repository section of my GitHub account, and I'm going to create a new repository. I'm going to keep this quite simple, give it a new repository name. I'm going to change one setting, which is changing it from public to private, so no one else can jump in. And then I'm going to click Create Repository. And it's that simple to get a place where we can store our code set up. And you'll be greeted with a slightly scary looking screen with a load of code on it. Don't worry about that. It's far easier to get started than that. And if you're at that level, you can crack on. I'm then going to jump back over to my Power BI report. Now I'm going to save my Power BI report. In this case, as a pbit file. And I need to do one step before I do that, which is jump into Visual Studio Code. And over on this left-hand side here, we've looked at extensions for installing our Power BI modeling server. And then we've got this option called source control, which means we can connect to GitHub. And what that'll do is we can either open a folder, which is stored locally on our machine, or we can clone a repository from the cloud. And so what that means is if we're in the cloud, we can bring that repository locally, make all of our changes, and then push it back. So I'm just going to click clone repository here. It's going to give me a nice clone from GitHub option. So I'll choose that. Click that a bit more effectively. And then it's going to ask me to sign in, which I'll allow. And then it's going to let me choose my account. And then it stops. And you think it should let you pick a repository, but it doesn't. So you have to go back over, clone your repository again, click clone from GitHub again, and now I have access to all my repositories. I'm going to choose that Power BI repository. It's going to ask me where I want to save it locally. So I've got a repos folder that I'm going to choose as my destination. And then it's going to create that folder with my repository in it. It's going to ask me if I'd like to open it, which I do. And then it's going to ask me if I want to trust the files in there, which, given that I've created it, I am going to do. And what we've then got in our Explorer section over here is we're connected to PBI Brum. And if I jump into source control, you'll see I get the option to publish my branch, which is the first step. Before we do that, I will jump over to my Power BI file that I was going to save, navigate to that repository in my C drive, and I'm going to save my file, not as a PBIX this time, but as a PBIT file. So I'm going to save that in that folder. And what we'll see when I've saved that, it's now done. By jumping back over to Visual Studio Code, in my Explorer, I now have my PBIT file. So I've got the PBIT file here, and I've got a folder for the report and a folder for the semantic model. If I browse into the semantic model, you can see all of my tables in here, my date tables that you couldn't see in the semantic model, or my ball table and my measures table are all in here, and they're all held as code, which means that AI can also write this code, and we can version control it. So everything is held at code, and this opens up loads of possibilities. What you'll also notice over on the left-hand side here is my source control now has 24 pending changes. And this is all my files that build up that PBIT file. So my semantic model and my report are all in these files. You'll also see there's a git ignore file. And this comes back to the security point I was mentioning earlier. And these are the two things you have to add to make sure none of your data and none of your local settings get into your repository. And it's done it for me, which is brilliant. So I'm now at the point of I've created something locally. I can store that in version control. So when I get AI to do my changes and development, if I don't like it, I can chuck it away, or I can put it into version control. And then that allows me to roll back any changes I don't like, but also to see what changes have been made. So we're at a really good point for agentic development. And there are some great features in this as well. So I'm going to click Stage All Changes that says I want to push all these changes to version control. And within here, I then get this button. So I can then code review all of my changes. So I can get AI to go and do my changes, and then I can get AI to code review my changes to make sure that it did something sensible. And that's a really useful feature. And it does come up with some good stuff. It comes up with some nonsense as well, but it does come up with some good stuff. And then I want to commit these changes and say what's changed. And so I can click this button, generate commit message. And so the AI tool is going to go through, work out what's changed, and give me a nice summary of what's changed. So I can then push that into my repository and see what's changed. And here you can see it said it's introduced a new PBIT file. And if I commit that and publish my branch, it will then be in my GitHub account. So if we jump back over to my repository and refresh this page, I now have my Power BI file all styled in version control, and it's the best Power BI version control we've ever had. So that's how you get started with PBIT files. So this isn't using the MCP server now. You have an alternative option, and there are different ways of using AI to develop Power BI. But this is just level 1 of getting started with our development. We've got 2 levels to go. So what's level 2? Agents and skills. So we started off by just giving a generic agent connected to a model and went crack on. So it's someone that's got a bit of knowledge about Power BI, who's got good knowledge and bad knowledge. We haven't told it what good looks like. What does good look like in my world? What do I want my models to be like? What do I want my naming conventions to be? How are we going to do that? And this sounds like quite a big thing to get started. But the good news is there are lots of people in the community that have shared agents and skills that you can use to get started. One repository is awesome GitHub Copilot. It starts out as a Git repository. It's got loads of agents and skills on there. And it's well worth checking out. They now have a website as well. So if you go on their website and search for Power BI, you can see they've got 4 agents here and some skills. And we can use those and get them in our agentic development to use AI in a much more effective way. And we can give our AI then these additional skills, this additional framework to get started. The first thing we're going to get started with is Microsoft Learn MCP. So we're introducing another MCP server here. And it's really easy to install. But what this will do is give your agent access to all of Microsoft's documentation. So now you're not starting with a generic agent, you're starting with an agent that can look at Microsoft's documentation, see what's going on, and use that. And all you have to do to get started with that is click this blue button here, install Microsoft Learn MCP. It's going to try and open Visual Studio Code, if we want it to do. And then it's going to jump us into Visual Studio Code and give us the Microsoft Learn MCP. We'll click install here, and that is it. It is now installed. So if you jump to the extensions on the left-hand side, you'll see we've got GitHub Copilot Chat and our modeling MCP server in installed extensions. And then down the bottom, we've got MCP servers and we've got Microsoft Learn. Now, don't ask me why the Power BI modeling MCP is at the top and the Microsoft Learn MCP is at the bottom. I don't know. But we are now configured. And if we jump over to our tools in our chat window, and up the top, you will then see we've got access to the Microsoft Learn MCP server. So this is a really good place to be. But that's just the Microsoft Learn MCP. We now want to go and get those agents and skills. And we've got Awesome Copilot, which is the easiest place to get started. We've got a few other repositories as well. So I'm clicking the share button. So we've got agent skills, so from MCP Market, so another good site. We've got a guy called Lucas Rees, who's created a PBIR report builder. So what he's doing is getting the JSON code and visual examples of all your visuals in Power BI and putting those into a skill, which is going to be really useful for visualization development. And we've got awesome LLM apps, which we're going to look at a UX designer for as well. And the good news is it's dead easy to get started with awesome GitHub Copilot and import these skills. So I'm going to jump back to Visual Studio Code, and in extensions, I'm going to search for awesome Copilot. And we've got this guy called Tim who has created an extension for us. So we're going to install this extension, and we trust Tim. And when we do that, we jump back to our Explorer window, we get Awesome Copilot here. And within there, we've got instructions, agents, and skills. If we open up the agents and scroll down to P, which is further down than I'd like, we have 4 agents already for us to use. And to install these for us to use, we can just click this download button. Up here, it's going to ask us where we want to save it. And I can hit enter. And then in my PBI Brum repository, I have that agent available to me. If I drop down to my chat down here and click on my agents button, you will now see I've got an agent, the Power BI Data Modeling Expert mode, that I can use instead of my generic agent. So this is giving us a much more tailored experience. I'm going to install all 4 of these agents, So I'm just going to hit download and enter on all of these. And I'm going to do the same for skills as well. So in skills, again, we get down to Power BI, and you can see here, it's not just Power BI development to do, there's an agent or a skill for all sorts of development. And I'm just going to install these skills as well, which my agents can then use. And when I've done that, you will notice in agents and skills, they are all available for us to use. And what else you'll notice is that in source control, it has all of our agents and skills within there as well. And so I can commit those to my repository, which I'm going to do. And what that means is you can have a repository that's set up completely for Power BI development. You can put your PBIT files within there, so you've got all your reports and your semantic models in one repository. And you can add in your agents and AI tools within that repository as well. So this means if you're working as a team, anyone in your team can connect to that repository and have the same development experience with AI and access to all of your reports and models to use it. So this is really exciting and really powerful. And this is only level 2. We've now got these agents available. If I jump into one of these agents, this is what it looks like. So we've got a description on it. We've got the model it's using. So these are a little bit old now, using 4.1, so we might want to update that. And we've got all of the tools that it's got access to. And then we've got the information that's been given to it of star schema design, fact and dimension tables, and best practice. But what you'll notice about these agents is they're all just natural language. So anyone can write these. You don't need to know code. You just need good knowledge about your subject matter, and anyone can write an agent. The other good news is if the agent does something you don't want it to do, which it undoubtedly will, you can use the AI tooling to go and update your agent and tell it to configure itself not to do that in future. So you can almost train these agents. It's not true training, but you can improve them and tell them what you want to do. So we can get to a really powerful point. But the exciting thing about this is that we're only at level 2. So there's a level beyond this. We can go one step further. And that is something like this. So we've got our 4 Power BI experts around the outside that we can use. We're going to bring in a new agent, which is UX Designer, which will allow us to create wireframes. And then we're going to create a project management agent that is able to talk to each of those agents. So we can end up with a process where you're starting to develop a Power BI report. You go to your project management agent, ask it to work with you on the requirements, get the UX designer to give you some wireframes so you can choose the output and what you want it to look like. And then when you're happy with that, you can get the project manager to hand it off to your data modeling expert to build your semantic model, your visualization expert to build your report. And we're at a stage where we have to do very little development. Now, it's not going to get it right first time, but we probably wouldn't either, right? So we can iterate on this, but it's going to accelerate your development massively. And the first time someone showed me this pattern of doing things, I was still at level 0. I was querying, typing in, how do I solve this DAX query into an LLM? And someone showed me this, and I was like, that's got to take weeks or months to get to that level. We're going to get to that level in the next 5 minutes. So let's see how you do that. So I'm going to jump over to my repositories, and I'm just going to bring in the UX Designer agent from a previous one that I've downloaded. So you can download this from GitHub, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to copy it from what I had earlier. And I'm going to go and grab the skill as well. So I'm just putting that manually into my repositories, which is also how you can update your agents and skills. They are just markdown files in a folder. So if we jump back over to Visual Studio, we're going to see we've now got the UX design way. And if we jump down here, we can see that we now have those 5 agents available to us. And we want to create that project management agent that's going to work with all of these. So Down here, we have our 3 default agents, our 5 agents that we want to work with, and we've got an option, configure custom agents. So I'm going to click that. And up the top here, I'll see the same thing, our 3 default agents, our 5 agents that we want to work with, and then we've got 2 options at the top. We can create a new custom agent, which if you want to start from scratch and write it all out, you can do. But we're looking at AI development. So when are we going to start anything from scratch anymore? So we're going to generate agent. And down here in the chat, we're going to get /agent. So I'm going to jump back over to my prompts file, and I'm going to bring this in and get it to start work on this agent. So I'm going to say, act as a project manager for Power BI development. You should gather your requirements, hand them to the UX designer, and develop some initial wireframes for our design. And then we're going to get sign off on one of those designs before handing it off to the other Power BI to develop. And that's a fairly basic prompt. If you want to get more advanced, you can, and more specific, you can put more detailed prompts in there. You can develop your whole process for it. But you can also ask it to help guide you through that. And so here it's going to go and actually do this agent development. So while it's doing that, let's have a look at what outputs this might then be able to produce. So the UX designer can produce wireframes. So to start with, before where you were either drawing it out on paper or maybe using Figma to design what you wanted it to look like, we can get fully customizable HTML outputs in minutes. So I've got 3 outputs of what I wanted a report to look like. And bear in mind, I've done no customization or training on this. This is just out the box. So I haven't told it what Power BI looks like and what those designs could be. So there is stuff HTML can do that Power BI can't do. So you might want to configure that. But for getting some ideas on what a layout might look like, this is a great starting. And we can then choose one of these concepts that we like to then go and develop further. And if we're then using this with our Power BI files, we can look at some transformations. So I'm going to jump to this file. And what we see here is from that starting point where I had 2 tables, we now have some dimensional models and additional tables. Now, this version of the data model I didn't particularly like. There's a better version that it did. But this is a probabilistic tool, so you're not going to get the same output every time. And if you don't like it, it's taken you a minute or 2 to get there. So just chuck it away and try again. And this entire report, so the semantic model and all of the visuals in here, well, it doesn't look very pretty and isn't what I'd want to present to anyone. I've not touched this. This is all AI development. So we've got multiple pages, we've got multiple visuals, and it took me no time at all to develop this. So even if you're using this output, which doesn't look very good as a starting point, you're a lot further ahead than you could have been otherwise. Here is another file that same prompt to go and create a star schema from it. And this one, I think it did a much better job. We've got a much better dimensional and fact model scheme. And again, none of that was with me touching it. All AI development. And so now we're going to jump back to look at how it's getting on with our project management data. And you'll see here, it's decided to ask me as what do I actually want it to do? So it's decided to ask me some questions. So should it act as a primary front door for Power BI work? We'll go with yep. What should count as handoff? So I'm going to say explicit approval phrase only. Do you want it to enforce specific architect files? So that's when the project manager is planning this and designing wireframes, I can get it to save all those plans and files into plans folders. So we're not starting from scratch at any point. We can save those plans down. So I'm going to say yes to that. And then it's asking if it should be sequential or adaptive. Just going to click adaptive. And so you see, when you're creating an agent, it may ask you some things to help improve your agent and make it better. Now, being a probabilistic tool, again, it doesn't do this every time. So I've done this 6 or 7 times, and maybe about half of those times it's asked me similar questions. And it's now going to go and write that agent. And here we say it's finished it. And so it says but it's now implemented that agent that's going to act as my front door and act as those handoffs. And it's giving me some example prompts to try. And then it's telling me things I can do to improve that agent. So every time I use AI, it's telling me how to improve it or make it better. No other tool does that. You don't get that when you're building a Power BI report. It doesn't tell you that visualizations of it rubbish. You can do it like this. But AI will do that. And so you can iterate and improve that. And what does this agent now look like? So we now have our project management agent over here. And it looks like the other agents. So it's got access to less tools, but critically, it's got access to these 5 agents that it can hand tasks on. And it's got the information around what it should be doing. So that's it. We've gone from starting out with no agentic development at all. We've installed Visual Studio Code. We've got a GitHub account. And by half an hour later, we now have a project management agent that can work with other Power BI specialists to develop our Power BI reports that we've got version control within GitHub. So we've gone from development is changing to this exciting world in very little time. You can get started really easily. Now, there are other MCP servers that you might want to check out. So the top one, DAX Performance Tuner. So if you're having performance issues, it's a great tool to use. And that's in the Fabric toolbox, if you're familiar with that. And there is another Power BI MCP server, which is the remote Power BI MCP server. And that's designed for querying your data. So that's more if you want to ask questions to your semantic model about your data rather than develop. So development is changing. We've gone from an old way to a new way. But when you look at this process, it doesn't change a huge amount. We've still got to go through that requirement gathering phase, that cycle of building a proof of concept, developing our model, and developing our report. But what changes is our starting point. So we're no longer starting how we used to. We're starting with Visual Studio Code and agentic tools. And the really exciting bit is this middle bit. We can then review and iterate so much faster than we ever could before. You spent a day on proof of concept before, you can now spend 20 minutes on it. And so chucking away a day's work was really painful if you wanted to start again. You'd always try and adapt it and move on. Now we can do that so many times during the day. We can just, it's not the route we want to go, we can throw it away. So we can explore options far more easily than we ever could before. And that means we should be able to get to better outputs. The really exciting part of this is we're at the very beginning of this journey. The Power BI MCP server was launched in November. We're 5 months into having that available as a tool to us. Power BI Desktop, as we know it, has been around for nearly 11 years. What do you think this tool is going to look like? Not even in 11 years, 6 months, 1 year's time. Where are we going to be with this technology? It's a really exciting place to be. So development really is changing, but you've seen it's taken us just over half an hour to get started. So the barriers to entry are low. So my plea to you all is get started now. Thank you.